So I would like to thank the organizers of the Haunted Shores Conference for accepting my paper. I'm really excited to be sharing it with you all. The deep sea is a haunted house, the Queer Oceanic Uncanny. The deep sea is a haunted house, a place in which things that are not to exist move about in the darkness. Unstill is the word Leah uses, tilting her head to the side as if in answer to some sound, though the evening is quiet. Dry hum of the road outside the window and little to draw the ear besides. The ocean is unstill, she says, further down than you think. All the way to the bottom, things move. She seldom talks this much or this fluently, legs crossed and gaze towards the window, the familiar slant of her expression, all her features slipping gently to the left. The opening lines of Julia Armfield's novel Our Wives Under the Sea get us immediately acquainted with the heart of the matter. The ocean is an agent of transformation, complete and ineluctable metamorphosis, one that proves at best profoundly disquieting. Dive in and you run the risk of being changed. And when you spend months on end in the depths, then who knows what you will bring back with you to the surface, who knows what you will become. And this is what happens to Leah, Mary's wife. While the ocean as agent of transformation is a well-worn trope, Armfield queers it to great effect, revealing the ways in which the categories of the queer, the monstrous, the uncanny, and the ocean can intersect in deeply generative ways. This is what I've been thinking about for this paper, the entanglements of female queerness and the oceanic uncanny, and their aesthetic and political implications. Right now, I don't clearly know where this is going. It's something I've started to explore in my dissertation, and I've been kind of expanding that whole line of thought, so please bear with me. I will start by quickly unpacking concepts that are central to my argument, and then I will move on to a discussion of two novels, first River Solomon's The Deep, and then Armfield's novel. While the association between the queer and the monstrous is a historically well-documented one, the association between the queer and the oceanic might be more puzzling, and yet it recurs throughout queer literature. While all kinds of spaces may be queered, there's a broader argument to be made that queer and queered representations will favor liminal spaces in particular, where known boundaries may be abolished, possibilities and ambiguities can proliferate, and the human must confront the limits of the anthropogenic world. This is the case of urban spaces, which are rife within queer literature, but also the mountain, the forest, the shore, and the ocean. My use of queer here stems from multiple sources. First, Sidgwick's characterization, the open mesh of possibilities, gaps, overlaps, dissonances and resonances, lapses and excesses of meaning, when the constituent elements of anyone's gender, of anyone's sexuality, aren't made or can be made to signify monolithically. Second, Butler's reminder. If the term queer is to be a site of collective contestation, the point of departure for a set of historical reflections and future imaginings, it will have to remain that which is in the present never fully owned, but always and only redeployed, twisted, queered from a prior usage, and in the direction of urgent and expending political purposes. And third, Giffney and Hurd's pithy statement, queer as a term comes to signify the continual unhinging of certainties and the systematic disturbing of the familiar. The reason I want to start with three quotes is that it seems to me that because of what it designates, because of what it embodies, the category of the queer cannot be reduced to one single statement, one all-encompassing and definitive definition. And now, if we compare this to characterization of the oceanic in critical work, such as Bo Howard's description of the Atlantic world, we find also resonances and intersections. Thus, the Atlantic, the ocean in general, is fundamentally a space of dispersion, conjunction, distribution, contingency, heterogeneity, and of intersecting and stratified lines and images. In short, a field of strategic possibilities in which the oceanic order holds all together in a common but highly fluid space. The categories of the oceanic and the queer are both highly fluid and heterogeneous, and both hold a profusion of possibilities. The association of the ocean with beginnings, all life pulled out of the ocean, is echoed in the queer ability to defy preordained teleological endings. What's more, as Giffney and Hurd's quote indicates, the uncanny is lodged at the heart of both queerness and the ocean, because they both force us to contend with the unknowable at the heart of what is thought to be known and familiar. Both the geographical and metaphorical ocean, and queerness as a historical dynamic, an identity and a mode of relationality, are profoundly haunted phenomena. The specters that animate them signal what Blanco and Pirenne call the ultimate disjointedness of ontology, history, inheritance, materiality, and ideology. Speaking of materiality, I want to heed Esther Bloom's reminder that the sea is not a metaphor. She advocates a practice of oceanic studies that is attentive to the material conditions and praxis of the maritime world, one that draws from the epistemological structures provided by the lives and writings of those for whom the sea was simultaneously workplace, home, passage, penitentiary, and promise. And we might add to that list graveyard as well. In keeping with this practice, taking care to not erase the materiality and historicity of what we're talking about, the novels I'll be looking at today do not separate the metaphors that are readily available at the intersection of the oceanic, the queer, and the uncanny from their material contexts. As we'll see, the meditation that Solomon's The Deep offers on the regenerative powers of the queer oceanic is born from the trauma of slavery. This heritage is never forgotten. In Our Wives Under the Sea, the broader theme of coping with grief is embodied in encounters with the ocean that leave permanent marks. One last thing is my desire to focus specifically on narratives of female queerness, precisely because of the mythological and historical associations between womanhood and nature or wilderness in general, and water in particular. Representations of the ocean as male do abound in Western thought, Poseidon, god of the sea, most likely because of the power unleashed by oceanic storms, which definitely couldn't be the work of dainty naiads. But overall, the characterizations of water as an ever-changing element, of the ocean as an aquatic wilderness to be discovered and tamed by human enterprise, make the critical intersections of representation of womanhood and female queerness particularly interesting. So the first example I want to delve on is River Solomon's The Deep. It's a novella, the third iteration actually, of something that started in the mid-90s with Drexciya, a Detroit-based techno-electro duo who created the oceanic Afrofuturist mythology of Drexciya, which is an utopian underwater society created by the descendants of pregnant African enslaved women who were thrown overboard and gave birth to babies that never needed air. Then 10 years later, Clipping, an experimental hip-hop group comprised of David Diggs, William Hudson, and Jonathan Snipes, created a song, The Deep, for the radio program This American Life's episode on Afrofuturism. The song exists within and expands on the initially created universe. And then in 2019, River Solomon expanded that world even further in their novella. Put together, these are to be thought of as artifacts, as primary sources, each showing a different angle on a world whose nature can never be observed in totality, as the members of Clipping write in the afterword to the novella. Solomon's The Deep depicts the Wajinru, which means in their language, chorus of the deep. These merfolk are the descendants of thousands of pregnant African enslaved women thrown overboard from slave ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean. They have, so the descendants have developed their own utopian underwater society where they stay away from surface interference. They did go to war at some point before the surface, as they were threatened by energy companies trying to lay waste to the ocean depths in their attempt at getting to precious fossil fuels. Among the Wajinru, one person, the historian, must completely suppress their own personality and identity in order to make room within their consciousness for all the memories of all the Wajinru. The historian bears the burden of memory, and a yearly ritual, which is the remembrance, has the historian sharing the traumatic memories, guiding the rest of the community through the pain of history. Because of her extremely high degree of sensory and emotional sensitivity, Yetu is this generation's historian, but this burden constantly threatens to engulf, overwhelm, and destroy her. She flees to the surface, leaving behind her community and the ritual, and she becomes trapped in a tidal pool where she meets Uri, a two-leg who is the last of her own people, and whose kindness slowly has Yetu realizing that not all humans are oppressors. Yetu's decision to escape during the remembrance may ensure her own short-term survival, but it dooms her community to relive over and over again their traumatic history, the pain of which they are not equipped to bear. Their anguish spurs a raging storm that threatens the entire world. Yetu then must decide whether to return and save both her people and humans like Uri, or to stay away. Spoiler alert, at the very end, Yetu has found a way to be what she wants to be and beckons Uri. Stay with me and we will make a new thing. Yetu is able to transfer to Uri the remembering of the womb, and when Uri jolts away from it, she is breathing underwater. She has not transformed into a Wajinru, but into a completely new thing, finding her place in the ocean with Yetu. This time, the two legs venturing into the depths had not been abandoned to the sea, but invited into it. The uncanniness of the ocean in Solomon's novella is profoundly regenerative. It grapples with historical trauma and the possibility of recovery in its wake, and here I use wake as a throwback to Christina Sharp's wake work. It's also a reminder of where the true horror lies, in colonialism, white supremacy, slavery, patriarchy, in the ruthless systems certain humans have designed and maintained. In response, the horror of the oceanic depths houses means of resistance and repair, urging us to think about how we can memorialize what by definition has had no witness. And the answer may be through imagination. Without your history, you are empty, as Yetu reminds her people. And yet, as a dilemma illustrates, how does one remember, how does one endure the strain of traumatic history? As Sadia Hartman asks, put differently, how does one rewrite the chronicle of a death foretold and anticipated, as a collective biography of dead subjects, as a counter-history of the human, as a practice of freedom? And how can narrative embody life in words and at the same time respect what we cannot know? Is it possible to construct a story from the locus of impossible speech, or resurrect lives from the ruins? Or is narration its own gift and its own end, that is, all that is realizable when overcoming the past and redeeming the dead are not? And what do stories afford anyway? A way of living in the world in the aftermath of catastrophe and devastation? A home in the world for the mutilated and violated self? For whom? For us or for them? Through its uncanny unsettling of all anthropogenic systems, the ocean provides a space to ask and imagine necessarily partial answers to these questions, and it does so in a profoundly queer framework within Solomon's novella. Uri's transformation into a new being at the end, spurred on by an invitation into the depths rather than by violent oppression, signals the transformative power of her queer oceanic ecology, which, fluid and planetary as it is, can act as one starting point to imagine and enact new relationalities, new modes of identity, and community building. So the motif of oceanic transformation crops up in Julia Armfield's Our Wives Under the Sea, which I quoted from at the very beginning. But this time, the horror aspect is magnified, and clearly our two lesbian protagonists don't really get to be together. Our Wives Under the Sea alternates between two points of view, Miri's and Leah's. So we follow Miri as she tries to understand what has happened to her wife, Leah, a marine biologist working for the Nebulous Center for Marine Inquiry. They sent Leah on what was supposed to be a routine 3-week deep-sea research trip in a submarine, but an unexplained system failure has the 3 members of the crew trapped on the bottom of the ocean for several months and unable to communicate with the surface. During this period, Miri waits, with little to no information about Leah's situation, presuming her dead, until the submarine miraculously comes back with only 2 crewmates left, and Miri now has to grapple with the return of her clearly changed and still transforming wife. Leah barely says a word. She has taken to spending most of her days immersed in the bathtub. When she comes out, Miri notices pinkish grime around the edge. Leah's sections chronicle her time in the submarine, her sections in the novel. It's a log that she kept of the events, which is given to Miri at the very end by the sister of Jelka, the crew member who vanished. So the novel alternates between their 2 points of view, and it's structured in 5 parts, bearing the names of the ocean's 5 vertical zones: sunlight, twilight, midnight, abyssal, hadal. As you move deeper into the ocean depths, the light keeps dimming until there is none at all, and the marine inhabitants keep growing weirder. Similarly, the progression of the book takes us from a household that is still familiar and recognizable in its simplicity and ordinariness, despite the disquieting elements already creeping in, to a place where things get just plain weird. We go from uncanny to horror, which works on multiple levels here. The psychological horror Leah experiences during her time in submarine, and the body horror Miri witnesses as Leah transforms. This bodily transformation is queer and oceanic. It synthesizes the horrors of the deep sea brought onto land. What makes them horrors is that on land, there is no readily available framework for understanding them. They do not correspond to pre-existing categories. It's also queer because of this boundary blurring deviation from the norm that regulates the human, the subtle and the uncanny changes, her features slipping to the left, morphing into monstrousness. Leah's body oozes, leaks looser than eye, shifts in color, collapses, shrinks, is nothing but water in Miri's hands at the very end, when Miri brings Leah back to the ocean. As Sarah McCarry remarks, monsters have long served as synecdochic stand-ins for unruly bodies, queer, disabled, mad, resistant to colonization. The monster is persecuted for its ungovernability. The monster dies at the end of the story, but the monster demands a sequel. The monster always returns. Here, everyone thinks the monster has been left on the bottom of the ocean, but the monster has also been brought back onto land, and the monster demands a return to the depths. Leah becomes an avatar, the Little Mermaid, slipping back into the foam of the sea by the end of the novel. However, while it implies the end of Miri and Leah's relationship, and thus another thing to grieve for Miri, it's not experienced as a death so much as the beginning for something else for Leah. This is what will keep Leah alive, albeit not in the form Miri has known, the result of this alchemist sea changing something into something else. The last scenes for Miri and Leah foreground liminality. What persists after this is only air and water and me between them, not quite either, and with one foot straining for the sand. But it also foregrounds cyclicality, with Miri letting Leah slip back into the ocean, the primordial point of origin for all life on Earth. And with in Leah's section, which is the very last section of the book, and which chronicles her the moment when she is coming back up to the surface in the submarine, she is thinking only of Miri, her wife being her world's point of reference. In fact, the novel's entire seemingly linear progression is coupled with disjointed temporalities, a hallmark of both queer and oceanic temporalities. Time shrinks and expands for the unborn Miri as she waits with no news about Leah's situation and reminisces about her life, her dead mother. Time is abolished altogether for Leah in the submarine as she waits for something to happen. Time ceaselessly circles back. So these two novels foreground the transformative power not just of the ocean, but of the ocean depths. Even a single encounter with the depths leaves you altered, with permanence marks that lead to an ontological metamorphosis, one that must be accepted and embraced in order to fully reveal its generative potential. The novels thus stage what I call the Queer Oceanic Uncanny. The encounter with the ocean depths produces a sense of defamiliarization, which calls into question the systems of thought and power humans have elaborated, and points us to the potential of queer ecologies, which articulate, as Laura Linkiel puts it, a variegated history of loss, struggle, and creative transformation. The Queer Oceanic Uncanny holds reparative power in the face of historical trauma. It allows for a redefinition of monstrousness that accounts for the entanglements of human and monster that we so willingly repress. The Queer Oceanic Uncanny may also simply lead us to confront dynamics of loss, grief, mourning, and trauma in order to reintegrate more fully, more attentively, the land of the living. Thank you.